So are you. Well, I think along with this, the idea of the elements, and that, well, and also the impermanence of things, that as we stay grounded in the body, there's a rootedness for us to experience the brightness of belonging. There's a metaphor that Sebene Selassie talks about in her book, You Belong, from the Thai forest tradition that says, practice is like the wax and wick of a candle. The wax provides the steady ground of centeredness. The wick, the spark of understanding. And the illuminating light they create together is the love, joy, and freedom of belonging. If you have a lot of wax but no wick, you will be steady, but you have no understanding. And if you have a lot of wick but not much wax, you can have insights, but they won't last beyond the brief flickering bursts. So many of us hear about meditation and we understand why it's good for us and it all makes sense inside our heads, but we don't actually do it. We think about it, flickering, our understanding with nothing to sustain the light. And, sometimes we're just sort of a culture of wackiness. We have a lot of bright ideas with not much steadiness. And so our bodies can provide us the waxiness that we're missing. Rather than following every bursting thought, we sense the support of the body. And that's why we start with grounding ourselves. And in the Satipatthana Sutta, there's the contemplation of the body. And there's a very concise version of the elements section where he speaks to the monastics, saying, in regard to this very body, however placed, however disposed, reflects by way of the elements. There are in the body the earth element, the water element, the fire element, and the wind element. Just as though, and this is an interesting example, just as though a clever butcher or a butcher's apprentice, after slaughtering a cow, were sitting down at a crossroads after dividing it into portions. Even so, monks, a monk is regarded in regard to this very body, however placed, however disposed, reflects by way of the elements. There are in this body the earth element, the water element, the fire element, and the wind element. And immediately preceding it is the contemplation of the parts of the body. So moreover, we regard to the body from the sole of the feet upwards, from the hair of the head down, bound by skin, and full of manifold impurities, reflects thus. And then it goes through the reflections of the body, hairs of the head, body hairs, nail, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, pleura, spleen, lungs, intestine, mesentery, undigested food, excrement, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, spit, mucus, synovial fluid, urine, all of the elements. Just as though there were a bag open at both ends, full of various kinds of grain, such as hill rice, white rice, mung beans, kidney beans, sesame seeds, chickpeas. And a man with good vision, having opened it, were to reflect, this is hill rice, this is white rice, these are mung beans, these are sesame seeds, these are chickpeas. Even so, a monk in regard to this very body, from the sole of the feet upward, from the hair of the head downward, bounded by the skin, and full of manifold impurities, reflects thus. There are in the body hairs of the head, body hairs, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bone marrow, kidneys, and it goes on the same way it did before, repeating. So it's just noticing that as we attend to, I guess sort of one purpose of the analysis could be that goes back to suffering results from craving, and that results from perception. And so if we see things purely, each of those kinds of rice or each of the elements of the body, a kind of disenchantment arises, which helps encourage us to pursue that chain of the result of non-suffering, of non-clinging. And so there's the solidity or the attraction, and it holds something together, and we can feel it as tightness and pressure in the body. And there's liquidity or relative motion, and then there's the heat, energy, and the body temperature, and the vibrations in the body that we feel in meditation, differences of temperature in and outside of meditation, and the expansion, sometimes pulsations and contractions in the body, or the flow of the breath and gases in the belly and the passing of wind and all of that. So experiencing these elements happening through the body, and then noticing with mindfulness and consciousness that there's pain that comes with it, or pleasure that comes with it, or there's a neutral sensation. It gives us another way of looking at impermanence without a grasping and attaching to, what it is we are always wanting to hang on to. So that led me in looking at the elements to sharing with you a couple of the poems from the First Buddhist Women. You might have heard some of these before, and it's from the First Buddhist Women translations and commentary on the Therigatha, which we studied once in our women's group. And I always like going back to some of these. And there are some great descriptions about who the women were that were the elder female teachers. And so she arranges this book. In most of the suttas, it's arranged by verse, like 4 stanzas, 5 stanzas, 6 stanzas, 8 stanzas, 10 stanzas. But to make it a little more interesting, Susan does a lot of research, and she divides it into Mahapajapati, Gautama and her disciples, and then Patachara and her disciples, and then there's wanderers and disciples, wise women and teachers, mothers, wives, old women, prostitutes, courtesan, and beautiful women, friends and sisters, Buddhist nuns, nature, and then there are some longer dialogue poems. But there are a couple that always are striking to me and, just make me think. So Vimala, I'll try to shorten some of the descriptions, but Vimala was the daughter of a prostitute. And so when she grew up, she followed her mother's trade. And a story survives her life as a young prostitute. One day in Vesali, Vimala encountered Moggallala. Whether she knew of his status as a leading monk under Gautama or not, it is said that she went to his dwelling place and tried to seduce him. Her attempt failed completely. Moggallana proved a model renunciate and spurned her and, gave certain words that later the Buddha said that it was outstanding what he said, and that, he's among one of his disciples, exceptional amongst the disciples, by turning her away. And some things occurred after that, so that she actually became a Buddhist lay disciple by that rejection. And then she ordained as a nun, and then ultimately she became realized. She was an arhat. And so it might be odd, why would Vimala become a Buddhist on the basis of this being put down by this monk? And it relates to the interdependence of the renunciate and the prostitute in Indian culture and in Theravadan Buddhism systems. Theravadan Buddhism, with its goal of subduing sensual pleasure and its elevation of the status of the celibate monk or nun, inadvertently sets sexuality in opposition to religious accomplishment. Under such a system, a model renunciate who speaks and acts as Moggallana did to Vimala becomes the hero. Yet the hero needs an enemy. Each is incomplete without the other. How is Moggallana incomplete? Moggallana falls short in his cruel and self-protecting response to Vimala. His words reveal a person attached to his purity, who has externalized all negativity. And there's this Zen koan that is taken up with the same theme, but it has a little bit different outcome. An old woman provided alms to a certain monk for 20 years. One day she sent her 16-year-old niece with the alms food and instructions. The girl laid her head on the old monk's lap and said, "How is this?" The monk replied, "A withered tree is rooted in an ancient rock. It is without warmth, without life." When the girl returned, she told the old woman what had happened. "You hypocrite," the old woman cried out, and she drove the monk away and burned down his hut. So we might question the use of the niece as the bait to test the monk's realization. His response is recognized by the old woman as aloof and defensive. And so, on the other hand, she wasn't looking for the monk to take the niece up on the invitation. For the old woman, an appropriate answer would acknowledge that sexuality exists, but would neither revile the girl nor make her a sex object. So this is a really interesting chapter and section in this book. So returning to Vimala's part in the interaction, she has her problems too. In the first stanzas of her poem, there's a sense of her egoism and anger. And on the one hand, she's proud of her sexual power, and she's built this identity around it. And you'll hear what she has to say, which is pretty interesting. And yet she hates men on whom she is at the same time dependent. And so, given this clash of pride and scorn, Vimala might have felt particularly challenged by Moggallana, not only because of his celibacy, but because of the superior virtue that it implied. So having grown up in an ungentle world, Vimala's next step is interesting as sort of the resolution of that Zen koan is unexpected. She becomes a renunciate. And that step can be viewed from, various perspectives. It's possible that renunciation is merely a new form of her old self-hatred, in which she imitates Moggallala's fear and rejection of her sexuality. So from this perspective, the line from a poem that says, "I've cut men and gods out of my life," would be equivalent to the same rejection that Moggallala did. But on the other hand, there's another stanza in the poem where she says, "I, my same self." So this suggests that hasn't rejected the person that she once was, but instead she's affirming a continuity in her life, and implying that she's built an impenetrable wall around herself, shows that she's no longer ruled by these inside images or outside forces. And so in this reading, Vimala becomes a renunciate who is not afraid of the world, and a person who is truly free. So here is her writing. Young, intoxicated by my own lovely skin, my figure, my gorgeous looks, and famous too, I despised other women. Dressed to kill, at the whorehouse door, I was a hunter and spread my snare for fools. And when I stripped for them, I was the woman of their dreams. I laughed as I teased them. Today, head shaved, robed, alms wanderer, I, my same self, sit at the tree's foot. No thought. All ties untied. I have cut men and gods out of my life. I have quenched the fires. Quenching the fires. Our process of noticing attachment and desires and trying to view them with a way that we can be in the world but not completely dragged around by the senses. The other poem, the other writing of, these aren't really poems, they're the writings of these women who all became enlightened. This one is written in with a sense of humor in a way. At least that's how it's been translated. It's Ambapali, and her origins were considered supernatural. According to legends, she came to birth spontaneously in the city of Vaisali. And she was discovered by a gardener at the foot of a mango tree. Her name, Ambapali, means mango protectress or mango guardian. And she was so astonishingly beautiful that princes fought to possess her. The strife was settled by appointing her the chief courtesan of Vaisali. So because of her, Vaisali was actually said to have become a very prosperous city. And among her patrons was King Bimbisara. And like one of the other Padumavati, Ambapali also bore a son by Bimbisali, by the king, who became a Buddhist monk. And so these sons seem to have become these convincing proselytizers. And Ambapali's son was also influenced by his mother's decision to renounce the world, which she did at one point. And so she abandoned fame and money, and she became a devout Buddhist disciple. And she had never heard the Buddha preach, though he was by now a man in his late 60s and early 70s, and he had a wide reputation and following. And so when Ambapali learned that the Buddha was preaching in a nearby town, she went to meet him and to hear his sermon. And she also invited him and his monks to eat with her the next day. So Gautama accepted, and later that day he received a similar invitation from the powerful and prestigious Lechikavas tribe. And he postponed that lunch until the day after his lunch with Ambapali to keep his promise to her. So when the next day dawned, the Buddha warned his monks to guard their passion and to be careful not to lose their heads over Ambapali. From Ambapali's point of view, the event was a great success, and as a result, she built a hermitage on her land and gave it to the Sangha. It was in that very place that the Buddha rested his 80th year, 4 months before he died. So she was considered one of his greatest benefactors. So there's this comparison of the beauty of a woman and then the resplendent things in nature. And in this book, I won't read the other poem, but there's a poem that a bridegroom writes. And this is sort of put back to back because of the differences in the way that they are viewing the beauty. So here is Ambapali many years later, now that we know her history. My hair was black and curly, the color of black bees. Now that I am old, it is like the hemp of trees. This is the teaching of one who speaks truth. Fragrant as a scented oak, I wore flowers in my hair. Now, because of old age, it smells like dog's hair. This is the teaching of one who speaks truth. It was thick as a grove, and I parted it with comb and pin. Now, because of old age, it is thin, very thin. This is the teaching of one who speaks the truth. My eyebrows were crescents, painted well. Now they droop and are wrinkled as well. This is the teaching of one who speaks the truth. My eyes flashed like jewels, long, black. Now they don't make anyone look back. This is the teaching of one who speaks the truth. My earlobes were beautiful as bracelets, highly crafted and bright. Now they sag and have wrinkles, all right. This is the teaching of one who speaks the truth. My teeth were beautiful, the color of plantain buds. Now, because of old age, they are broken and yellow. This is the teaching of one who speaks truths. I had a sweet voice, like a cuckoo moving in a thicket. Now cracked and halting, you can hear my age in it. This is the teaching of one who speaks the truth. My arms were beautiful twin pillars. They hung free. Now, because of old age, they are weak as the patali tree. This is the teaching of one who speaks truth. My hands were beautiful, set off by rings, gold as the sun. Now, because of old age, they are radishes or onions. This is the teaching of one who speaks the truth. My breasts were beautiful, high, close together and round. Now, like empty water bags, they hang down. This is the teaching of one who speaks the truth. My thighs were beautiful like an elephant's trunk. Now, because of old age, they are like bamboo stalks. This is the teaching of one who speaks truth. My calves were beautiful. Gold anklets I wore as jewelry. Now these same calves look like sticks of sesame. This is the teaching of one who speaks the truth. My feet were beautiful, delicate as if filled with cotton. Now, because of old age, they are cracked and rotten. This is the teaching of one who speaks the truth. This is how my body was. Now it is dilapidated, the place of pain, an old house with plaster falling off. So these definitely evoke a lot of emotional response, I would have to say, especially as women ourselves who feel like this marching on of the impermanent nature of things is looking rather challenging as we get older. I used to laughingly say, getting older was for sissies, but now I sort of agree with those people that are more like, getting older sucks. And so it's like, as practitioners, we try to see the reality of what's right in front of us, that whatever is happening is in constant change, that it's all of the elements coming together, and we have the opportunity to actually explore that by being with whatever element might arise in our practice, and returning to the breath as the grounding object, and having a kind of understanding of the Brahma Viharas, of holding ourselves in kindness and compassion, and remembering joy, and using equanimity to see clearly what happens, that whatever arises passes away, and we don't avoid it. We surround it with presence and try to stay non-judgmental, to just be with mindfulness and awareness and investigation, to see over time if a kind of dispassion can arise, so that we don't fall into grasping at how we wished it was, or pushing away the way it really is. So this conversation goes on, but it takes us back to the teachings of clinging and craving and suffering, and seeing things clearly and doing our practice as best we can, and the joy that can arise because we're willing to do this practice, willing to see things how they are. Sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not so great. So I don't know if I tied any of that together, the various ways that my mind went this afternoon when I was thinking about things, but let's see if we can have some conversation about it. And I'll drink a little bit of water.